Welcome, welcome, welcome to our self-study online training. This is the fifth class about 10 clauses, number 1 to number 10. Let's study one by one. The first one is scope, normative references, terms and definitions, context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. And this four is the requirement. So for the overall, we can review for the ISO and we can study for clauses.
The difference between the previous revision of ISO 9001 2008 edition and the current revision ISO 9001 2015 version. And I will also be covering in this video the different clauses of ISO 9001 2015 edition. I will be briefly touch basing what was the need to upgrade from the previous revision to current revision as well. So before moving ahead, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and do hit that bell icon as well. And you can see there are a couple of videos which I have posted on this channel which are related to Six Sigma, quality statistics and project management, and I have a plan to upload few more videos in the coming weeks. So do keep yourself updated with this channel and do subscribe. Let's begin today's topic. Now what is ISO 9001 here? ISO stands for International Organization for Standardization. ISO is basically derived from a Greek word which means equal, and ISO wanted to convey the idea of equality and the idea that they developed standard to place organization on an equal footing. That is why it is the ISO, not the IOS. ISO is basically based out in Switzerland in the city called Geneva, and it was founded in 1946 to develop the common set of standards in manufacturing, trade and communication. It is being adopted over in 170 countries with approximately more than 20,000 standards worldwide. Over 350,000 companies worldwide are registered to ISO 9001 as of now. So if I talk about the purpose of ISO 9001, it is to assure the customer that the suppliers can provide quality product and services. They are basically several different documents in ISO 9001 family of standards, but the ISO 9001 is the only standard in 9000 series which requires certification. So in short, I would say the ISO 9000 standard don't tell you how to run your business. They only define the critical documented elements that must be taken into consideration to produce quality product. It is not a product standard, it is not a service standard as well, but it is a process standard. So let us look at the brief history of quality management system standards here. So in 1950s and 60s, US was on top of manufacturing world and competition was only between the US companies. In late 80s, because of the world moved towards the global trade, nation industries needed to agree on the quality assurance standards. Because of the global trade, US went back to quality management system and the statistical control. In 1970s, BSI published the series of guidance standards, and in this 79, BSI published and submitted them to ISO. In 1987, ISO published its first series of 9000 standards, and the first revision of ISO 9000 standard came in 1994. In 2000, second revision of ISO 9000 series came, and it also came with the merging of ISO 9002 and ISO 9003 into a single standard of ISO 9001. In 2008, the third revision of ISO 9000 revision came, and the current revision of ISO 9001 is the 2015 version, which we have current right now. So the ISO 9001 was 2015 version was first published on September 23rd, 2015, and with this publication, 3-year transition period was stated by allowing companies to upgrade to latest version by September 2018, and by after that, all the ISO 9000 certification will become invalid at that point of time. In case if you have missed this deadline and lost your ISO 9000 certification, you don't worry, you still can get your certified to ISO 9001. However, you will not be able to enterprise your certification until you achieve the certification to ISO 9001. Losing your ISO certification could be certainly problematic from marketing point of view, and your company may not be qualified as supplier if ISO 9000 is a requirement. The sooner you recertify yourself, better it is for your company. So why do we need to revise the standard every time from 2018 to 2015 version? So going by the rule, all the ISO management system standards are submitted to regular review under the rule, and they are reviewed every 5 years and revised if required. The challenges faced by business and organizations today are very different from what we had few decades back, and ISO 9000 has been updated to take into account this new environment. For example, the increased globalization has changed the way we do business, and organizations often operate more complex supply chains than they did in past. In addition, there are increased expectations from customers and other interested parties, and with more access to information, today wider society has a stronger voice than ever before. ISO 9001 needs to reflect these changes in order to remain relevant. So let us see what are the difference in the principles of two versions 2008 and 2015. So let us start with 2008 first. So we have the customer focus, which was moved translated to same as the 15 version. Involvement of people became the leadership. Process approach moved to engagement of people. We have systematic approach to management, which was process approach here. And then we have the continual improvement, which was like improvement here. Factual approach to decision making, which was evidence based decision making. Mutual benefits supplier relationship, which was relationship management. So these are the two structures of ISO 9001 2008 version and ISO 9001 2015 version. In ISO 9001, if you look at, there are around 8 clauses, and in 9001 version there are around 10 clauses. The first three clauses, scope, normative reference, and terms of definition, are same. There is no change in that, but there is a change from the clause 4 to clause 10. So that will be going discussing in detail in this video. So what has changed? New concepts are considered more risk-based thinking. The customer remains the primary focus. A new common ISO format has been developed for use across all the management system standards. A significant reordering of key clauses. The most noticeable change to the standard is its new structure. ISO 9001-2015 now follows the same overall structure as the other ISO management system standards, known as the high-level structure, making it easy for anyone using the multiple management system. So the ISO 9001 standard is based out of PDCA concept, that is plan to check act, and that is why it is having a similar structure. The first three clauses are basically same in both these versions, but there is a considerable difference when it comes to the last, from the fourth clause onwards. The last seven clauses in the current revision of 2015 are basically arranged according to the PDCA cycle. So if you look at this diagram, so the plan phase has clause 4, clause 5, clause 6, and clause 7. The do phase has clause 8, the check phase has clause 9, and the act phase has clause 10. So with this new standard in place, the organization will find it easier to incorporate their quality management system into the core business and get more involvement from senior management, which is crucial for the success. As there are no subsequent changes in the first three clauses of both the revisions, so I will be straight away focusing on the clause 4. But here, in the clause 3, there are some difference in the terms and definitions. All the terms and definitions related to ISO 9001 can be found out in the standard, but unfortunately, they are not provided any definition for the terms used. And it is very important to get understanding of the terms before the company starts implementing the requirements of the standards. So here are some of the important differences between the terms and difference and definitions from the two versions. So let's start with the first version of 2008. So we have the products which get translated to products and services in the latest version. So on the left side we have the old revision 2008. On the right side we have the latest revision 2015. So the old revision we have the documentation, quality manual, documented procedures, records and instructions. And in the latest revision we have the documented information. In the new revision we have the work environment, and in the latest version we have the environment for operations and process. In the old revision we have the monitoring and the measuring equipment, and the latest revision we have definition as monitoring and measuring resources. In the old revision we have the purchased product, and in the new revision we have the externally provided product and services. In the old revision we have suppliers, in the new revision we have the external provider. So let's start with the clause 4. So clause 4 in ISO 9001 2008 version was the quality management system, which is being now being translated to the context of an organization. This clause 4 in latest revision has four subclauses: subclause 4.1, subclause 4.2, subclause 4.3, and there is subclause 4.4. Talking about subclause 4.1, that is understanding the organization and its context. So it talks about the new requirement as compared to 2008 version of standard, and requires the organization to determine all that internal and external issues that may be relevant to achievement of objectives, and this includes all elements that are maybe capable of affecting those objectives and outcomes in the future. So talking about the subclause 4.2, which is like understanding the names and the expectations of the interested parties. So again, it is a new clause, so and it requires the organization to ensure that the first product and services meet the customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. These interested parties could be your direct customers, your employees, suppliers, your corporate partners, society, your competitors, government, local authority, and anyone who can be has an impact on your business. So they must identify who interested parties are and monitor and review the information. And next is the subclause 4.3, which determines the scope of quality management system. The organization must clearly define what they sell, including product and services. Determining the scope is one of the main milestones in implementation. The scope and the justified evaluation must be documented. Then the last subclause is the quality management system and its process. And this standard basically requires organization to establish a process-based management system. This is required to be maintained and continuously improved. This clause set out to be a high-level requirement for design of such process-based management systems. The organization basically needs to establish, maintain, implement, and continuously improve its QMS system including both the processes and the its interactions in accordance with the requirements of standard. Then the next clause is the clause 5, which is in management responsibility, which in current revision is being bifurcated into two clauses, clause 5 and clause 6. The clause 5, which is like leadership, and clause 6 is planning. Again, the clause 5 of new revision is being has three sub clauses. Sub clause 5.1, which talks about leadership and commitment. Sub clause 2 talk about the quality policy. Sub clause 3 5.3 talks about the organization roles, responsibilities, and the authorities. Let's look at more detail into these sub clauses of leadership. So the sub-clause 5.1, which talks about the leadership and commitment, is basically talks about giving much more hands-on respect to the QMS from the top management. So when the words like promoting, talking, engaging, supporting, something like that can be delegated and must be undertaken by the top management themselves. Sub-clause 5.2, which is like quality policy, is should be maintained and documented to be communicated within the organization and be available to all the interested parties whenever they ask for. Subclause 5.3 talks about the organization roles, responsibilities, and the authorities. So you have to define your roles and responsibilities precisely and communicate to all the hierarchical levels of your organization. Then the next we have is the clause 6, which is planning. And again it is bifurcated into three subclauses. Subclause 6.1, which talks about the actions to address risk and opportunities, and basically the purpose of this addressing risk is to ensure that the QMS will achieve the intended results, enhance the desirable effects, and achieve improvement. The action have to be planned and implemented in the QMS and later evaluated for the effectiveness. And when we talk about the subclause 6.2, which talks about the quality objectives and planning to achieve them. So this standard requires top management to establish the quality objectives for appropriate functions and departments in the organization, whether it is HR, production, purchase, marketing, quality, design, so etc. So quality objectives must be measurable, quantitative, and timed. They must be in line with the quality policy so that it can be determined whether the objectives are met, and if not, what should be done in this case. Next is the subclause 6.3, which talks about the planning changes. So when the organization determines the need for the change to the QMS, the changes needs to be carried out in the planned manner. This could include considering their uh, purpose or consequence, the integrity of the QMS, the availability of resources, and allocation of responsibilities and the authorities in this case. So the next is the clause 6, which is resource management in the previous revision, and in the current revision it is the clause 7, which is support. And this clause 7 support is basically has 5 sub clauses. So we start with sub clause 7.1, which is resources. So this standard basically requires the organization to determine and provide the resources, which could be the people or infrastructure, and monitor an effectiveness of these resources. So next we have the subclause 7.2, competency. The organization basically needs to determine the necessary competency of its employees and ensure those employees are competent on the basis of appropriate education, training, and experience. This means that the organization will need to have the process for determining the necessary competence and achieving it through training and other means. Example could be the increase in sales needs for additional training surveys. Working out the skill of your team has and the skill your team they don't have is critical here. The next section is the subclause 7.3, awareness. So this is a new requirement, and there is a greater focus on not just communicating the policy, but also ensuring that it is well understood and how it affects the individual. Staff should be understand that what they contribute and how this will make the business better. Employers must be made aware of the quality policy and its content and any current and future impact that may impact their business. And next is the subclause 7.4, which is communication. This is a straightforward clause and simply put about the effectively communicating to all the stakeholders within the business and those who are affected by it. Process for internal and external communication needs to be established within the QMS system. Next is the subclause 7.5, which is like documented information. And last subclause, documented information, talks about what is the need for the QMS. For the proper control, organization must provide the provision for distributing, retention, access, usage, prevention, storage, and control, and disposition of such information. So the clause 7 and last, that is product realization, which is now the clause 8 as operations. And the clause 8 in the current revision has 7 subsections. So clause 8.1, which talks about the operation planning and control, it basically talks about the need to plan, implement, and control its processes. The first step is basically is to determine the requirement for product and services, meaning that what features the product or service will have, and then the organization needs to define how the process will be performed, what criteria the product or service needs to meet, and finally the organization needs to determine the resources for the process and record the processes which is carried out as planned. The second clause talks about like requirement for product and service. It is basically closely related to the communicating with the customers. So this communication must include information which is like related to product and service, handling inquiries, contracts or orders, customer feedback, handling and controlling the customer property if needed for the contingency actions. The next subclause is the subclause 8.3. So this clause of design and development for product and service basically refers to design and development management, right from initial idea stage when you first create your idea till the final acceptance of your product at the customer end. In ISO 9000, normally the two terms, design and development, are often confusing and used as synonymously, but they are different terms. This meaning the design cannot be apart from development, and they represent the one single process. During the design and development planning, all its phases must be defined with the appropriate activities of reviewing, verification, and validation for each phase. The next subclause is subclause 8.4, which talks about the control of externally provided processes, product, and service. So one of the examples could be the organization that needs to establish and document the criteria for supplier selections, which include like how crucial the purchase product or service is to the quality of your product, and the results of supplier evaluation must be kept here. Next is the subclause 8.5, which is like the production and service provision. For the subclause 8.5 production and service provision, the company needs to perform under controlled conditions that will ensure that the product and service delivered is compliant with the initial requirement. This includes a sufficient level of documentation like procedures, work instructions, or records, and monitoring and measuring equipments and appropriate infrastructures, etc. Next is the subclause 8.6, release of product and service. So release of product and service shouldn't be performed until the organization ensures that the product and service are conforming to the requirement. Last is the control of non-conforming products, where organization needs to control the non-conforming outputs from unintended use or delivery, so that the organization must identify and control the outputs that emerge at any phase of production or service delivery. The next section is the clause 8, measurement, analysis and improvement, which is now being bifurcated into two clauses, clause 9 and clause 10. Clause 9 is like performance evaluation and clause 10 is improvement. In the clause 9 again, the performance evaluation is bifurcated into three sub-clauses. So sub-clause 9.1 talks about like monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation. This is about a wider aspect of monitoring and measurement. Information derived from monitoring, measuring, and analysis represents the inputs in the process of improvement and management reviews. Monitoring customer satisfaction level must be consistent. Then once the information about the customer is collected via phone, interview, or question, or any other means, an organization needs to analyze the results in order to evaluate the conformity of product or service. Next is the sub-clause 9.2, internal audit. So the goal of internal audit is not to determine the non-conformity. This goal is basically to check whether your QMS system complies with the requirement of ISO 9001 or not, and what is not, and what are you failing to achieve as per the requirements of ISO 9001. Next is the subclause 9.3, management review. So at least once a year, the top management must review the QMS code in order to determine its appropriateness, adequacy, and effectiveness. This review must evaluate the possibilities for improvement and need for changing the QMS, either the quality policy or for improvement or for needing QMS or resources needed for upcoming period. The next is the clause 10 for improvement. Again, it has three sub clauses. Sub clause 10.1, which is like general, which talks about the results of management review, that organization must make decision and take action based on management review to drive towards the continual improvement. This action could be in the form of other corrective actions, recognitions, trainings, innovations, or any other forms. Next is the subclause 10.2, which is like non-conformity and corrective action. For the non-conformity and the corrective action, any non-conformity needs to be reacted upon by taking action to control it and deal with the consequences. So once identified, the non-conformity should trigger a corrective action in order to remove the cause of the non-conformity and prevent its reoccurrence. And the effectiveness of action has to be documented somewhere. Next is the subclause 10.3, continual improvement. So continual improvement is a key aspect of QMS to achieve and maintain the quality management system, suitability, adequacy, effectiveness, regardless of the organization objectives. So that concludes all the clauses of 9001 2015 version. Now let us look at what are the benefits of ISO 9001. The first benefit is like improved consistency of service and product performance, higher customer satisfaction level, improved customer perception, improved productivity and efficiency, cost reduction, improved communication, morale, and job satisfaction, competitive advantage and increased marketing and sales, and more opportunities in the market. So let us conclude what we have learned today is that this standard basically provides the organization with the guidance as a quality of the product and service, with the ultimate goal of achieving the customer satisfaction. Delivering all the clauses of standard and truly understanding them can benefit your organization and drive your company on the roads of continual improvement. Certification and compliance can bring reputation, motivation, and the financial benefit as well to your organization through the improved efficiency, quality of product and services, and avoiding your non-conformity and the customer complaints, along with the improvement in your supply chain. So that's all I have for this session on ISO 9001. In case if you like, give it thumbs up.
Let's check one by one. The scope.
Hey, welcome to this video where I will work with you to help understand the clause number 1 of the ISO 9001 2015 standard. When I started recording these ISO 9001 videos, one of the simplest video was obviously the clause number 1, where the standard essentially tells us what this is all about. But for me, if you want to become a ISO 9001 practitioner, you must understand the basic conscience of the ISO 9001 standard. And in your entire journey as an auditor or as an implementation person, you must ensure that the conscience of ISO 9001 is kept well. Let me read this through to you. 1. Scope. This international standard specifies requirements for a quality management system when an organization A needs to demonstrate its ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, and B aims to enhance customer satisfaction through the effective application of the system, including processes for improvement of the system and assurance of conformity to customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. I would recommend that you read this over and over again, maybe 100 times, before you start on your journey to become ISO 9001 practitioner. From how I see this, it is telling us that 3 basic elements is what ISO 9001 seeks to achieve. A, that any organization implementing ISO 9001 must possess demonstrable ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer requirement, as also the applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. So if you are looking for creating an organization that is ISO 9001 certified, you are essentially looking at an organization to build demonstrable ability. Merely possessing that ability may not be good enough. You will have to have the ability to be able to showcase that you're capable of providing products and services that meet customer requirement, applicable statutory and regulatory requirements as well. Additionally, an organization that is ISO 9001 certified or is in pursuit of it must be able to demonstrate aim to enhance customer satisfaction through the effective application of the system. So one must be able to build processes, system that work at enhancement of customer satisfaction, and C, work at processes for improvement of the system and assurance of A, B, and C. So for me, 3 basic conscience elements. A, having demonstrable ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer requirement and the law of the land. B, aims at enhancing customer satisfaction through the effective application of the system. And C, processes for improvement of the system. So if you are an auditor, if you are an ISO 9001 auditor, you must understand that when you are looking at doing an ISO 9001 audit, you are also checking for letter and spirit of the conscience element. A, does the organization exhibit or demonstrate ability to meet the customer requirement, etc.? Does it aim to enhance customer satisfaction through the effective application of the system, and C, does it work at improvement of the system? I would recommend that you go through this clause several times before you start your pursuit as an auditor or an implementation person. This is how the people who framed ISO 9001 have written the document for you. You must ensure that these three elements are understood and built into the system, where an organizational process captures customer requirement, the traceability between the customer requirement and the final product is easier. So let's say I am a design engineer who is hired to build designs for people building bungalows. As the first step of the business process, I ask customer what does he need and formally document it. And that formal documentation is used as a validation process, as a validation step before the final product is delivered to the customer. Maybe a design document is what is my final product. I can work at building a traceability between what the customer wanted and what was finally delivered. But other businesses which don't see customer requirement right at the start, a Microsoft does not ask you what features does Microsoft Office possess before they pass on the product to you. I haven't sought your requirement before I'm creating this video for you. All innovative product designs may not mandatorily talk to the customer, seek customer requirement while in the pursuit of creation of the product. In such cases, a well-written specification document of what the product can do and cannot do, what you advertise to the world, could be that document taken as traceability between what the customer wanted and what we gave it to him. Before you click I agree on a software purchase, it gives you a detailed list of what it can do, certain binding contractual agreements as well, whether the purchase includes being able to use it commercially or not, what features does the software have, etc., is also a manifestation of what product or service features have, and then by clicking I agree, the customer is agreeing to buying a product which meets his requirement. Similarly, you must build a system to enhance customer satisfaction. Maybe customer satisfaction surveys need to be conducted, and you have to have a continuous pursuit of improving the customer satisfaction. Again, a system has to be designed. And finally, you must build processes that work at improvement of the system. It further goes on to say, all the requirements of this international standard are generic and are intended to be applicable to any organization regardless of its type or size or the product and service provided. So it is saying that ISO 9001 as an international standard is very generic in nature, and regardless of any organization, regardless of its type or size or what kind of products or services it provides, ISO 9001 is applicable throughout. So a small printing company can look at ISO 9001 implementation. A large multinational technology group can look at ISO 9001 implementation. A chemical factory could look at ISO 9001 implementation. A government department can look at ISO 9001 implementation. An ISO 9001 implementation is neither driven by the size of the company. You could be a very large, a 300,000 people working for you kind of a company, to a 20 people working company. Irrespective of the size of the company, ISO 9001 is applicable. A small note mentioned here, it says, in this international standard, the term product or service only applies to products and services intended for or required by the customer. So anything that you're producing within for internal consumption or as an input to a subsequent business process may not be required to be considered as a product or service. Let me reiterate before I close this video. While in your pursuit for ISO 9001 implementation, please ensure that you've gone through this clause several times, and you ensure that you understand the guiding element of this standard before you take up the auditing or the implementation role. And please ensure that you preserve the conscience while in your implementation or audit journey. I hope you find this video helpful. Thank you.
Yes, clause number 1, scope. Scope of the standard. And let's see context of the organization.
In today's edition of AGF Consulting Group Micro Learning Videos, let's take a more in-depth look at Clause 4.0, Context of the Organization. What exactly does the new ISO 9001 mean about context of the organization? Clause 4.0 of the new ISO 9001 contains the following. 4.1, Understanding the organization and its context. 4.2, Understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. 4.3, Determining the scope of the quality management system. And 4.4, Quality management system and its processes. Let's start with 4.1, Understanding the organization and its context. As stated by the standard, organizations shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and its strategic direction, and that affect its ability to achieve the intended results of the quality management system. We are also required to monitor and review information related to the identified internal and external issues. External issues of the organization can be legal, market, cultural, technological, social, economic, international, national, regional, local, or any issues related to the business from an external perspective. Internal issues are the values, culture, knowledge, or performance of the business organization. Now, this is new in ISO 9001 and may be difficult or too broad a concept to understand. It is crucial to emphasize, however, that it is important to take time to really understand the context of your business organization by examining what are internal and external issues that are currently affecting your business or issues that may have potential impact on your organization. The old reliable SWOT analysis is a useful guide for this process. Next is 4.2, which talks about understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. As stated by the standard, due to the impact or potential impact on the organization's ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer, applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, the organization shall determine interested parties that are relevant to the quality management system. Requirements of interested parties. Your interested parties can be your customers, suppliers, investors, employees, and other stakeholders. You can begin with simple stakeholders register with their identified needs and expectations about your products, services, or your organization in general. These are answers to the basic question as to who are your stakeholders and what do they need and want. It is followed by 4.3, which then state the importance of determining the scope of the quality management system. As stated by the standard, the organization shall determine the boundaries and applicability of the quality management system to establish the scope. Not all of the elements of ISO 9001 may be applicable to the size and nature of your business organization. Identifying what is applicable will clearly set the boundaries and applicability of the ISO 9001 to your quality management system. Lastly, 4.4, Quality Management System and its processes. This is a good opportunity to design and develop the right processes, especially those processes that have vital impact to the quality of your products or services. We call these processes directly related to quality. In order to design the right processes, consider the following important elements: inputs and outputs of the process, sequence and interaction, criteria, methods, measurements, and indicators to ensure effective operation and control of the processes, resource requirements, responsibilities and authorities, risk and opportunities. This is a new requirement in ISO 9001. Methods for monitoring, measurement, evaluation, and required changes to achieve intended results. Evaluation of these processes and implementation of any changes needed to ensure the intended results. It is also important to note, as stated by the ISO 9001 standard, that the organization shall maintain documented information to the extent necessary to support the operation of the processes and retain documented information to the extent necessary to have confidence that the processes are being carried out as planned. Before you establish your quality management system, be sure to spend some time to define the context of your organization by truly identifying internal and external issues that affect your organization's purpose and strategic direction, the needs and expectations of your interested parties, the sequence, resources, risks, and opportunities of the right processes needed in your business organization. To know more about how to go through 4.0, context of the organization of the new ISO 9001, go to our website at www.
Yes, this is context of organization. And for the scope, let's take a look more.
Hey, welcome back. Uh, Welcome back to my video series on understanding ISO 9001. Through this video, we shall work at understanding clause number 4.3, determining the scope of the quality management system. While in pursuit of ISO 9001 implementation or audit, one of the clauses of paramount importance will be clause number 4.3. Let me first read this through and then we can talk about it. It says, the organization shall determine the boundaries and applicability of the QMS to establish its scope. When determining the scope, the organization shall consider A. The external and internal issues referred to in 4.1, B. Requirements of the relevant interested parties referred to in 4.2, C. The product and services of the organization. The organization shall apply all the requirements of this international standard if they are applicable within the determined scope of its quality management system. The scope of the organizational QMS shall be available and be maintained as a documented information. The scope shall state the type of products and services covered and provide justification for any requirements of this international standard that the organization determines is not applicable to the scope of its QMS. Conformity to this international standard may only be claimed if the requirements determined as not being applicable do not affect the organization's ability or responsibility to ensure the conformity of its product and services and the enhancement of customer satisfaction. While this is a very straightforward part of the ISO 9001 standard, but if understood well, this particular clause in the ISO standard is what will lay the foundation stone of your implementation or auditing journey for the 9001 standard. If you are the implementation person or representing the team that has to do with the implementation of 9001, you must carefully articulate what are going to be the boundaries and applicability of the QMS to establish its scope. ISO 9001 gives you the freedom to choose between the several products that you have. So let's say you are a company that produces 20 products and for some reason you only want to take up 10 products for ISO 9001 certification. Allowed. You can go ahead and mention that in the documented information that you wish to maintain. Similarly, if you operate out of multiple geographies, maybe multiple countries or cities, you can choose which locations would you want to keep as in scope, would you want to keep as out scope. You can also look at excluding departments, but you must always realize that should you choose to keep some particular location, business process, etc. out of scope, it mustn't affect the organization's ability or responsibility to ensure the conformity of its product and services and the enhancement of customer satisfaction. I recommend that you go through my video on clause number 1, where I have mentioned the basic conscience of ISO 9001. For me, the three driving elements of ISO 9001 is about demonstrable ability to meet the requirements as laid down by a customer and the statutory and regulatory requirement. Your ability to enhance the customer satisfaction through the effective application of the system and of improvement of the system. So when you are deciding on the scope of the ISO 9001 implementation, you must understand that you cannot do away with these three basic conscience elements. And if you have outsourced some business process, and if you have outsourced some particular part of your business process, controls need to be exhibited if it affects any of these three elements that I mentioned. Let's say you have a shared service model wherein all your HR function is managed at a particular location, and for some reason you've chosen to keep that location as out of scope. Then all the HR controls that are required by the ISO 9001 standard still continue to be mandatory. The organization will have to exhibit that such outsourced processes have been managed well to ensure that organizational processes are able to manage business accordingly. Wherever you are maintaining scope as a documented information, you must ensure that whatever exclusions you've taken from the ISO 9001 standard, that exclusion and the justification for the same must be maintained together at the same place. A point of caution here, you being able to convince the auditor for exclusion is going to be very difficult. So you must have justifiable reasons, and that reason cannot impact the organization's ability or responsibility to ensure the conformity of its product and services and enhancement of customer satisfaction. If you are the ISO 9001 auditor, either external or internal, your start point of your audit exercise should be looking at the scope as manifested in the documented information maintained. Your audit schedule, audit plan, etc. will have to consider the scope as mentioned, and you must always try and seek justification of the exclusion that the organization has sought for non-conforming to any particular clause requirements. Typical situations wherein organizations seek exclusion could be because one could be a recent example that I have had for a medical equipment company based out of India, which is headquartered in Switzerland. But the India unit is essentially a sales driven company only. They are not producing any product here. So wherever design and development of the product related requirements are mentioned in the ISO 9001 clause, the India unit chose to take exclusion, and it was justified. A different organization was producing products, but the design component of the product was always provided to them by their customers. They chose to take exclusion for design and development related clauses as in the ISO 9001 standard, and it was justifiable. Let me sum it up for you. Scope must be available as a documented information. If you are seeking any exclusion, you must mention the exclusion and its justification. The ISO standard allows you to choose from your entire product or service categories, but that must be mentioned wherever you are mentioning the scope. You can choose to go in with certain locations and do away with certain, but again, it must be mentioned as a part of your scope statement for ISO 9001. I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you.
And still, context of the organization, close 4, and wrap up this 5th class. We'll meet next class starting from close 5 leadership. Thank you so much.